In this video, we're going to do the final assembly of the Andre Bouchard watch. The first thing I'm going to do is change the crystal because the original crystal in it has gotten really milky with age, and so it needs to be replaced. I've got a brand new one for it. To remove the crystal, we use this device, which is called a crystal lift, and it has these jaws that open up to different sizes. And what you do is you open it up a little bit larger than the original crystal, and then you set it down on top of the crystal like that, and then tighten the jaws around the crystal. This is to remove the old crystal. Tighten the jaws up until it compresses the old crystal enough that you can lift it out. This is an acrylic crystal, and so it's flexible. You can't use this on a glass crystal. This is only for plastic crystals. There we go, it's lifted right out. Open the jaws back up to drop the old crystal out. And to prepare the new crystal, we use this, which came with the crystal lift. We lay the new crystal on it. Adjust this so that it's holding the crystal in place. The purpose of this is to elevate the jaws of the crystal slightly above the bottom edge of the crystal. You want to compress the sides, but you don't want the jaws of the crystal lift all the way at the bottom of the crystal, because then it wouldn't be able to drop into the watch case. So we're going to put this over the top of the new crystal. I'm going to open up a little bit further just to make sure we don't scratch it. And then we'll tighten the jaws around the crystal. Okay, now it's actually touching the crystal. And I'm going to tighten it a little further to compress it. And hopefully it will be compressed enough that we can drop it into the watch case. Not quite enough, it needs to be compressed a little more. So we'll just tighten it up some more. Let's try this again. It's still a little too big. We're almost there, it's not quite small enough yet. There it is, now it's going in. Make sure that it's even on all the sides. Okay, now that I've got the crystal in the watch case, we're going to set the case down and loosen the jaws, and it should drop the crystal right into place then. Let's see how we did. Looks good, I think. It looks like it's even. It's sticking at the same height on all sides. That's what we want. Nice clear crystal. Now you can see inside the watch case. We'll be able to see the face of it nice and well. We're ready now to start assembling the keyless works and the motion works. The first thing we need to do is put the cannon pinion on, and it goes over the center post that sticks down through the bottom of the movement. And that's actually the post from the center wheel. And I put a little tiny drop of HP 1300 oil around the base of that, around the bottom of the center post, so that the cannon pinion can rotate a little more easily around it when we're setting the time. I placed the cannon pinion over the center post, and I pushed it down so that it snaps into place. Now, in my previous videos, you'd see me use the flat end of my tweezers to push down on it from above. You do not want to do that on a watch like this one. This one has a sweep seconds hand, which means the second hand rotates around the center of the watch, just like the hour hand and minute hand. And so the bottom of the fourth wheel pinion sticks, or the bottom of the fourth wheel spindle sticks out of the top of the cannon pinion for the second hand to ride on. And so if you push down on it like that, you would damage that. So in order to snap this one into place, I wrap the tweezers around the cannon pinion itself and push down on the pinion, the gear at the bottom of the cannon pinion, and then it snaps into place. Next we're going to add the minute wheel, and that goes right here. And make sure that it meshes with the cannon pinion. And then on top of that, we're going to add the hour wheel, which goes on top of the cannon pinion. There we go, make sure it meshes with the pinion on top of the minute wheel. Next we add the intermediate wheel. The intermediate wheel is what transmits the motion of the stem being turned to the minute wheel and hour wheel to set the time when you have the stem pulled out to time setting mode. Now the next thing we're going to add in is we need to drop in the clutch and the winding pinion. This is the clutch. One end of it has gear teeth that interact with the intermediate wheel, and the other end has a pattern engraved into it that interacts with the winding pinion. So basically this slides back and forth to choose between using the winding pinion or using the intermediate wheel, depending on whether the stem is pulled in or out. And what we're going to do here is we're going to take a little bit of the 9504 grease and put a tiny thin coating of it on the side of it that goes up against the winding pinion, and then we'll drop it into the movement. Now I've got a little bit of grease added to it. Now we're going to put this into the movement, into the slot right there, and it's going to be put in with the part that I put the grease on facing toward the outside of the movement. There we go. The stem will go through that then after we install the, actually it's going to be after we put it into the case, but the next thing we're going to put in is the winding pinion. Now this has two sides. One side of it has the same grooves engraved in it that this clutch has, and the other side is smooth. We want the clutch side to be facing toward the clutch, so facing toward the inside of the movement. I have the winding pinion in, and you can see how the clutch and the winding pinion mate with each other with those grooves that are engraved in both of them. When they're pushed together, they lock together then, so that when you turn the clutch is actually what is attached to the winding stem. So when the clutch is up against the winding pinion, that causes the clutch will turn when the stem is turned, and then the clutch turns the winding pinion, which then turns the ratchet wheel on the top of the movement. Now the next thing we need to add is the mechanism that switches between winding and time setting mode, and that consists of the yoke and the yoke spring and the detent lever. And so the first thing we need to put in is the yoke and the yoke spring. I've installed the yoke, which is also sometimes called the set lever, and it goes from this pin right here all the way over here, and notice how the thin end of it goes into the groove around the clutch. That's because this pushes the clutch back and forth. Now this was a little harder to install than most of them I've done because the tip of it had to go into a groove that's in the movement here, so you had to kind of tuck it into that groove and then drop it down onto the pin here to get it into the right position. If you put it on the pen first, it would go on top of this part of the movement and wouldn't go into the groove that's engraved in there, and it wouldn't go in correctly. The next thing I need to put in is the yoke spring, which goes around this and then up against the yoke to push on it. And that's going to be a difficult one to do without it flying across the room. Here's how I'm going to put the yoke spring in. The shorter end of it has to go up against this piece on the movement here, and then it goes around that stem sticking up here, and then it has to go back along the back of the yoke here. And I'm going to do that part off camera because there's a big chance of it flying off if I don't hold it down. I've got to hold the spring down with one hand and use the tweezers to manipulate it with the other to get it into place. But I wanted to show you up close how it actually fits in there. Okay, I've got it in. I had a bit of a trouble getting it in there. I kept wanting to pop back out, but that's where it's supposed to be. Make sure you push it down all the way against the movement base plate once you get it in so it doesn't want to spring back up. Now the next thing we're going to install is the detent lever. I put the stem in just to make it a little easier to align everything, and you can see how the set lever goes into that groove on the top of the clutch. So when this lever moves back and forth, it pushes the clutch either against the intermediate wheel to set the time, or it pulls it back against the winding pinion to wind the watch. The thing that pushes this forward and backward is called the detent lever, and that is going to go over this screw right here. This is the screw that we put in on the other side of the movement that also holds the stem in place. There's a pin on the bottom of the detent lever that sticks into this little groove on the stem, and that's what holds the stem in place. And also, when you pull the stem in and out, that pulls the detent lever back and forth, and it rotates around the axis of the screw, pushing this forward and backward. And this is what the detent lever looks like. And I'm going to have to take the movement out of the holder and turn it over and hold this in place with my finger while I tighten the screw so that the screw will go through the hole there, because the hole is threaded for the screw, and that'll hold that in place. Then this little pin sticking up right here will then interact with the detent spring, which we're going to put on later, so that it holds it in place in each of the two positions. Okay, I've got the detent lever on, And the next thing we're going to put on is the detent spring, and the detent spring actually does two things. It's a big metal plate that covers up a lot of the stuff in the keyless works and the motion works to keep it in place, and it's also got the spring for the detent lever. Okay, the setting cap or setting bridge as it's sometimes called, which also includes the clutch lever spring, is in place. It's held on by these two screws. Notice how how I've got the spring over the little hole, or the little cutout in the spring goes over the little pin on the top of the detent lever, and I'll show you how this works. When you pull the stem out, you get winding mode, and see how that clicks into place. And when I turn the stem, you can see it turns the winding, or turns the gears to set the hands. And then when I push it in, it goes back to winding mode, and if I turned it, it would wind the watch. Now we're ready to put the dial on, and the first thing we need to do with that is put on the dial washer, and that just goes over the top of the hour wheel, just like that. And then the dial sits on top of all this, and we have to put the dial screws into the edge of the movement. The dial is in place, held on by the dial screws on the edge of the movement. There's two dial screws. There's one of them, and then the other is on the other side. There's the other. So those two screws hold the dial in place. On the top of the dial, we can see where the hands are going to go. You can see that there are three tubes sticking out of the dial. The brass one is the hour wheel, and that's where the hour hand goes. The larger of the two silver colored ones is the cannon pinion, that carries the minute hand. And then the really skinny silver one is the bottom spindle of the fourth wheel, and that carries the second hand. And so we're going to put the hands on those next. I've got the hour hand and minute hand on. Now I just need to do the second hand. But I wanted to point out something here. Notice how I have the hour hand pointing directly at the 9 and the minute hand directly at the 12. When you put the hour hand on, it needs to point directly at one of the hour markers. Doesn't matter which one. It doesn't have to be the 9. It could be any of them that you choose. But it has to point directly at one of the hour markers. And then when you put the minute hand on, it must point directly at the 12. And the reason for that is if you don't have those set up that way, when the minute hand is at the top of when the minute hand comes around to the 12 when the watch is running, the hour hand won't point directly at one of the hours as it's running, as it should. So they need to be aligned like this when you put them on. That way when the watch runs, they will stay perfectly synced, so that when the minute hand is at the 12, the hour hand always points directly at one of the hour markers and not in between two of the hour markers. The second hand also has to go on pointing directly at the 12, and the reason for that is that when the second hand is at the 12, the minute hand needs to point directly at one of the minute markers. If you have the minute hand directly at one of the minute markers, like the 12 that we have here, and the second hand is pointing somewhere else, then they won't be perfectly synced. When the second hand comes around to the 12, the minute hand will be between two minute markers, and that's not a good thing. So all those have to be aligned perfectly like that when you set everything up. The hour hand can point at any hour marker, doesn't matter which one, but it must point at an hour marker. Minute hand and second hand both must point directly at the 12 when we're setting this up. And there it is, I got it just about perfect. That I thought was going to be a lot harder than it turned out to be, because the second hand has to go on that very, very thin little post sticking up from the bottom of the fourth wheel, and it's easy to break that if you're not careful. And it's hard to get the hand directly on top of it as well. So I did good on that one. It went on perfectly the first time. So the next thing to do is case the watch. And what I'm going to have to do with that first is remove the stem. So I need to turn the watch over and loosen the stem retaining screw. Just enough. I want to loosen it just enough I can pull the stem, but not enough that the detent lever falls off. And then I can pull the stem, then I can drop this into the movement, or drop the movement into the case, and then put the stem back, and then put the case back on, and we'll be done then. I sat the watch movement on a cushion and dropped the case over it, and then I'm just going to pick this up and flip it over and let it drop in. And then put it back on the cushion there. You can see the movement and everything. Now there's a movement holder that we need to put in, and the movement holder has a cutout on one side where the stem goes to, so we need to make sure that that goes at the stem position. There we go. I had to jiggle it around a little bit to get it to go in. Now I can put the stem in. And before we put the stem in, I need to put a little bit of grease on the square parts of the stem and on the very tip of the stem to help lubricate it when it goes in there and turns. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to use 9504 grease for that purpose. Show that here if it'll focus on it. There we go. I'll put a little on all four sides of the square section. We don't want it on real super heavy though, just enough to lubricate it good. And then we will stick it into the movement then. Getting this in here is going to be a little tricky because I got to kind of rotate it until it pops. Ah, there we go. It went right in. I thought that was going to be a lot harder. You have to kind of rotate it to get the square part of the stem aligned with the square opening of the inside of the clutch, so sometimes that can be a bit of a challenge. Now that that's in, I need to tighten down the stem holding screw, and then we can wind it up and begin the process of regulating it. Here it is. I've got it all cased up. It looks absolutely beautiful now. With that new crystal, you can see that beautiful dial. I ended up having to put the hands on a second time because the first time I put the hands on, it would randomly stop at certain points, and I realized it's because I had the second hand pushed down slightly too far and it was rubbing against the minute hand. So I pulled the hands off and reinstalled them correctly this time, and now it's running beautifully. I've got it regulated. It's running at +1 second per day. We'll put it on the show you the watch and the Timegrapher in just a second. You can see the actual results from it. So yeah, I'm really happy with how this turned out. This watch was a lot of work. The case was in bad condition. You can still see it's got a lot of the finish worn off, but I had to, one of the lugs, this one here actually, was bent down really far for some reason. I'm not sure how someone managed to bend the lug on a watch, but it was bent down really far, and I had to hammer it back into position, and it was pushed too close together too. These two lugs were. So I had to stretch them out a bit so that they would have the same width as the lugs on the other end, because it's got 16mm lugs supposed to be on both sides for the strap. So I've got it now where the lugs are correct. I've got a new crystal in it. I've got the movement overhauled and running beautifully. I think this came out nice. I'm going to get a strap for it, and I'm going to wear this watch. I have my other watch that I introduced in another video, my Crawford watch, that I'm really excited about too. I'm going to work on this one very soon. This, I think, was actually made by the same company as the Andre Bouchard watch because it has the same case, it has a similar dial, and it has the exact same movement inside. So this one's going to be easy to work on. Since I had the experience with working on the Andre Bouchard watch here that has the same movement, it'll be easy to work on this other one because I had to learn a lot of new stuff with this movement. This was the first movement I've worked on that had a sweep center or a sweep seconds hand where the second hand rotated around the center instead of having a separate little small seconds dial. Watches with the center sweeping hand like this are a little more complex, so this was something I had to learn some new stuff with, and I had to work with the Inca block jewels too for the balance wheel, and that was a little different too. So this was an interesting learning experience. I got a lot out of it. Here it is in the Timegrapher, and we've got excellent readings, +1 second per day. The beat error is higher than I'd like, but I'm not going to correct that until I get a little more experience so I can adjust the collet on the hairspring. 1.5 milliseconds isn't great, but it's not horrible either, so I think I'm just going to leave this as it is right now until I get the experience to work on that hairspring collet and change the beat error. I'm pretty happy with it. This is really wonderful. This watch was losing about 5 minutes a day when I first got it.